Hello and good morning. The year 2022 is coming to a close, and I wanted to spend some time going over the music I put out this year. I do tend to put out more music than people are capable of keeping up with. In 2021, I released 8 full-length projects, but this year I only released 3 full-length projects, 4 singles, and 1 remix. And on top of that, I feel like this year was an important year for me. Without getting too morbid or in detail about my history, I have been alcohol-free for over a year now. The past year saw me reconnecting with this creative thread, or creative impulse in my life that I had been neglecting for, 4 or 5 years. And not being hungover all the time, not being buzzed all the time, allowed me to kind of slow down a little bit and recontextualize what making music means to me. And what did that mean to me? Well, this year it meant slowing down my process, doing more car tests, collecting older songs that maybe otherwise wouldn't have seen the light of day, and making little projects with them, waking up at 4 a.m. most days just to get some time in front of my computer before I start Starbucks at 7 a.m. To be honest, even on days when I didn't have work at Starbucks, I would still get up at like 4:30 just because making music is a very exciting thing for me, and I can't wait to get up and start doing it. I am also a huge morning person. So with all of that being said, I'm going to get into a little yearly recap of 2022. I'm going to go into the music I made, the albums that I made, and the times in my life that they occurred during. I'm going to talk about the process of each album construction a little bit, and kind of where my head was at with mixing and mastering at the time, along with some pictures to correspond with what I'm talking about. So let's get into it. 2022, year in review. Part 1, TONEM, February 3rd. So it's winter time, it's like just after the new year, and I have a pretty decent amount of music left over from 2021 that I didn't know if I was going to put out or not. And although I was still making a ton of stuff, I wasn't really feeling all that inspired. It was winter, it was dark all the time. Every day in the winter is like different. Some days are incredibly inspiring, other days are abysmally depressing. And I was kind of on the fence about if I even wanted to put out any music this year. I was kind of telling myself like, maybe it's time to just give up. I mean, this is before I started my YouTube channel, but I was listening to my secret SoundCloud. If you're not aware about that, it's Crying Abel. And I came across this older track called TONEM. And not only did I realize I never put this track out, like on streaming or anything, but I also made this track when I was living in a really beautiful apartment in Boston. And in this apartment, everything felt possible. I got my first playlisted song on Spotify, so I got my first little chunk of change from music. The feng shui of the room was just so enchanting. I felt like I was living in like a dojo or something. This was the view I had from my bedroom window every day. And the memory of this room that I was in kind of conjured up this need to put out music again. I kind of remembered that creative essence of why I'm doing this, and I suddenly had a reason to put out all this music from the end of 2021 that I had been sitting on. So within the span of about 3 days after hearing that, I got a bunch of music together, made some album art, and I set up a date for the release of what is now TONEM. It's also worth noting that most of the tracks on TONEM were made when I had just gotten the RC20. It's like the reason why I was making so much music with no interest in releasing anything, because I was just having such a fun time with RC20. But yeah, TONEM sparked the beginning of my musical journey during 2022, kind of got my ass back in gear a little bit and made me rethink why I'm making music and why I release projects. And on a personal level, it set a new precedent for the quality of art that I want to be putting into the world. I want it to be the same quality of art that the art life felt like in that beautiful Boston apartment. And just before we move on, that apartment is where I made Eternal Engine. So, Part 2, Morning Music, June 17th. So after the release of TONEM, I was really feeling myself, was getting back into just making beats. This is where my early morning routine really started to narrow down. Every day I was getting up at the earliest 4 a.m. and at the latest 5:30. And as the pandemic started to wind down, I started taking my trips back to New York City to hang out with my band. We took some photos. We just hung out, we goofed around, and I was just getting a ton of inspiration. And I was just getting the inspiration to start making beats again. I was focusing on YouTube. I learned how to run OBS. I started making more legitimate YouTube videos. And as just kind of an aside real quick, if you go back and watch some of my old live streams, which are available on my Patreon, and if you watch some of my studio updates, you'll hear me creating the songs that are on this album. So if you're ever curious about my production methods or anything like that, I implore you to go check out my studio update videos or my live streams. Some of my live streams are still on YouTube, but the newer ones are Patreon exclusives. So. The air was starting to get that warm, misty fog that comes with the springtime, and I just devoted my spring to really YouTube, but in the process made a few banging tracks that I really enjoyed. And before I knew it, I once again kind of organically created my next project, which ended up being morning music. This was my first spring in a long time, being able to enjoy the morning air. For the years before this, I was either buzzed, drunk, or hungover pretty much all the time. Early mornings were for healing up, and sometimes that healing up would take an entire day. And even though I put out a bunch of music in 2021, it was a pretty bad time. You know, it's kind of like I said at the beginning of the video, alcoholism wasn't really an option for me anymore. But luckily, I quickly found out that I am indeed a morning person. I have 2 orientations for my room that I alternate between for the winter and summer months. So right now I'm in my winter setup, which provides me more space in the room. It is a more space-efficient setup. But my window is over there, and I'm over here with my back to the room. All I got here is a wall. There's art everywhere, but I like sunlight. So in the summertime, when there is more sun and the sun rises more from the east and I get, 5 or 6 hours of sunlight in the morning, I like to put my setup over there by the window and then I put my bed over here. It's way less space efficient, but I do get my time with the sun, which is a priority always. And hey, just as a little bonus before we move on, here is an early version of the artwork that I was working on. You can see I had the shape of those star things figured out. And here is me with some water and bananas. Here's me after I cut my finger on a carrot peeler. I still have the scar from that. Don't know if you can see that, but still got the scar from it. I smoked a lot of weed this year, but I am, at the time of recording this video, 10 days completely and totally sober. So on top of the no drinking for over a year, I'm now experimenting with no weed smoking as well, and I must say, it's pretty nice. Here is a meme that meant a lot to me at the time that I found back then. And here's a little video clip of what it looked like in my little sunny nook on those mornings when I was making the music for this project. And thus, morning music is like my ode to not necessarily sobriety, because I was still smoking a shit ton of grass, but not drinking and being kind of more clear-headed and health-conscious with alcoholism and that kind of stuff. It's also, my most beady beat tape of 2022. Part 3, Tranquility Base, August 12th. So the summer just kept on cracking the way it started. More trips to New York, more weed, more time spent in front of my computer in the early wee hours of the morning. More car tests, a slower, more refined process. Taking super duper long walks out into the woods and absorbing the beautiful New England summer sun. And the result of all of this is what is now my favorite project I've ever put out. In my opinion, it is my most cohesive and well-presented project. It's also not related to the Arctic Monkeys album called the Tranquility Base Hotel and Casino. Didn't know about that at the time of making this album or naming it. I don't know if it was serendipity or if I heard of that album and just kind of jacked the vibe or whatever. Love the Arctic Monkeys, but it's not related to that at all. Think of this album as more of like a Plastic Beach kind of vibe. That's what I was really trying to rip off. As far as mixing and mastering goes, I think I outdid myself, and I am now intimidated by it when I go to mix and master future projects. Not really intimidated. Intimidated isn't the right word, but I do, I gotta size up to it, which is a good thing. We should always be improving. While making this album, I learned the benefits of broad EQ moves. For a long time, I've been doing the surgical Pro Q3 thing, and haven't really had much problems with it, but at the same time, it does feel surgical, and it makes everything feel digital and in the box. For this album, with the relentless car testing that I did, I realized that broader bands in the EQ are much more useful than getting surgical, especially the closer you get to the master. The more tracks you're mixing at once, the more broad those EQ moves should be. I also learned that less is more. If you listen to these tracks, the drums aren't super processed. They're very dry. Just for funsies, let's have a look at some alternate art that would have been used for the project. Here's one. Here's another. And here's another. And then this is like a back flap that would be on the back of the LP casing. I don't really have much more to say about this work because I'm that proud of it. I feel like it can kind of speak for itself. Just before we move on, check out this video of me recording the slide guitar for the final track on this record. This album set a new mix precedent for me, a new quality standard, if you will, and I did my very best to follow that quality standard in the next 4 singles that I put out. Part 4, Lamplighting, September 30th. So now we're getting into the 4th quarter of the year. This track is the first release in a series of 4 singles. The goal of these singles was to keep the same kind of spiritual energy of Tranquility Base. And in the case of this first track, it's very much a kind of Tranquility-based B-side that didn't quite make it onto the album. It has the same instrumental flavor, if you will, kind of acoustic, room-sounding instruments and very dry drums with a alternating A and B pattern of kind of faster drums and more chillax drums. I'm a very lucky duckling, and this single got put onto Jazztronica when it was released by Spotify. This first single also marks the rekindling of my lovely relationship with the label Sonderhaus. Sonderhaus is a genreless label. They also have a beautiful studio out in the Catskills of New York, which I haven't yet been to, but it looks just gorgeous. And they've been kind of like a guardian angel for me since my start in music. And I'm just absolutely thrilled to be working with them again. They don't function like a traditional label. There's no creative, looking over my shoulder or any type of control or anything. I have all the freedom in the world to do pretty much whatever I want, within reason, of course. It's just a beautiful symbiotic relationship that I am super excited to see grow in the year 2023. Part 5, Holidays. October 21st. I probably could have put all of these singles into one segment, but, whatever. I had a good time making the title screens, so I'm gonna use them, damn it. Holidays is kind of a funky little happy jam. I've been focusing my energy into making kind of more upbeat music lately. Again, carrying over the dry drum sound, kind of acoustic instruments, less electronics, and more of a kind of 70s dry, kind of small DIY vibe. At the time of making this particular single, I just subscribed to Spark from Universal Audio, and I was just kind of going through the motions of getting a bunch of really beautiful high-end plugins. I was super excited. I just wanted to make some music that was fun to mix, and this dry, organic sound is fun to mix. It's a little hard to hear, but in the second half of the song, an organ comes in, and that is the tone wheel organ that you can get with the UAD Spark, and it just sounds super creamy and delicious, and I love it. Part 6, Autumn Diver, November 18th. So now we're almost caught up with the time I recorded this video. This song features me playing my guitar quite a bit, and it still maintains that kind of dry, organic band sound, but the drums have a little bit more of an electronic edge. The Chaosilator is still all over this thing. I am still absolutely in love with the effects on that thing. I like to glitter them all over my beats. And the same theme continues, just, it's a progression of working on my mixing and my EQ work and my balance and a mix. For this whole year, I've been chasing that kind of squelchy bottom end, the so-called 1 pound sound, or like in my Dean Hurley video, just that squelchy, heavy, saturated, analog sounding low end. And that's kind of what I'm chasing with these singles, I'm after that sound. Part 7, Huddle Up, December 16th. So now we are at my final single of the 4, Huddle Up. You could technically call these 4 singles like a mini EP just spread out over 4 singles, because if you were to play them back to back, it would make sense. They all fit together quite nicely. It's a nice, humble little EP. With this final single, I just wanted to introduce some more synthy sounds. There's some twinkly high-up, cascading riffs. But once again, we're maintaining that dry 70s band sound. We got the vibraphone still punctuating hella nice. I'm kind of chasing a Miyazaki vibe with this one, kind of up in the clouds, mystical, fun, silly, but also, mysterious and ethereal. Part 8, Same Way Home, Wowflower Remix, December 2nd. So this one is a total doozy. Rodham sent me some stems of a song that he did with Adam Neely and Mark Lettieri. I don't know. But yeah, I received these stems and realized that, I was about to be working with stems that were recorded by these 3 legends, and kind of shit my pants a little bit. If you watch any of my live streams, you'll definitely pick up on the fact that I know a little bit of music theory. I can work my way around a keyboard. I can kind of play guitar a little bit. I'm mainly a drummer. But these guys are in a whole new level of music theory understanding, and their ability to kind of play with music theory and internalize it and create these kind of very complicated and moving chord progressions that on the surface sound very cohesive and listenable, but underneath are much more complicated, is pretty wild. So I told myself, I was like, you know what? Just do what I do. Don't overthink it. Don't get in your head about it. I made some coffee, opened Ableton, got going on these stems, and before I knew it, the track that is now my Same Way Home remix was starting to form. Yeah, sometimes you just gotta let go and trust the process. And yeah, it's getting streams, it's doing really well. Spotify has been very kind to me and placed it on 2 editorial playlists, and we're just very grateful over here. And with that, we conclude my 2022 recap. Go give these projects a listen. I will link all of them in the description below, make it very easy for you to access them. Enjoy them. What music have you released this year? Drop it in the comments below. Share it with everybody. Thank you for indulging my ego and letting me talk about my own music like this. It definitely feels weird. It's not something I've done before. But outside of YouTube and Instagram and social networks, I don't really talk about my own music very often. I tend to release projects and then just forget about them. So this has been very nice. And thank you for that. Happy New Year, everybody. I turned 27 on the 4th of January. 2023 is looking to be a fantastic year. Of course, anything can happen. It's important to wake up every day and just acknowledge the fact that you are lucky and alive, and making music in this life is a tremendous privilege that we should never overlook. If we're capable of making music, we are living a privileged and beautiful life. Please be safe, enjoy your time, and I'll see you in the next one.